Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Garry Crites, and I am the Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness of North Carolina. Peg is off tonight, so I will be your host. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and community around the topic of mental health. Tonight, we have two guests, both of whom you'll meet soon. Detective Amanda Stamps is an experienced retired law enforcement officer with years of managing a well-developed CIT program. She currently works as a training and community development coordinator for Community Bridges in Arizona. Amanda, who was a presenter at the recent CIT conference, really wonderful presentation. She is passionate about getting proper support for first responders so that they're equipped to handle the critical incidents. She has a master's degree in education with a focus on counseling and human resources from Northern Arizona University. Ryan Smith, the Community Safety Director for Durham, could not be here tonight, but we are so pleased to have with us Ryan's colleague, Leigh Mazur. Leigh has a Master of Social Work from Bridgewater State University and is a licensed clinical social worker. And even more pertinent for us tonight, she serves as one of the two clinical leaders over the new the new crisis response service in Durham. Now, as usual, the first part of the show will be an interview with our guests, and then partway through, we'll show a video of the week, and then we'll spend some time answering questions from you, our virtual studio audience, and our Facebook friends. But first, a word from our sponsors. Let me share my screen. Funding for Thursdays with NAMI is provided in part by the North Carolina Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Services Block Grant Fund. We always appreciate their guidance and their support. So, without further ado, welcome, Amanda and Leigh. It's so nice to have you here. We always like to know a little bit of background of our guests. So if you could, and there's no particular order, give us your stories in a nutshell. Amanda, you want to go first since you're coming from out of state?
Sure, I'll go first. My name is Amanda Stamps. I guess my background is I grew up in a Southern military family. Was born in Virginia, moved to Alabama, spent most of my childhood and teen years in Alabama. Went to college there, got my bachelor's there, decided I needed to get out of Alabama, and I randomly just started driving west. There were several graduate schools I had looked at, so I had my dog and a U-Haul, and I just was driving, and I ended up in Phoenix, Arizona in July, and it was 118 degrees. I'm not really sure what sane part of me thought, hey, I'm going to stay here. This is amazing. But I did end up staying because ASU had one of the degree programs that I was interested in, which ironically I did not end up doing. About 3 weeks after moving to Arizona, I was at a job fair trying to get a job with the FBI. Because I fancied myself like Silence of the Lambs, Clarice on Silence of the Lambs.
I love it.
Wanted to be a behavioral profiler, and I found out that a psychology degree and working as a waitress in a restaurant was not enough to get you in the FBI. So I went to call my mother and have a chat with her about my sorrows. At that point in time, I was robbed. My entire life savings were stolen from me. The Mesa Police Department responded to take my police report, told me that they were hiring, but at the end of the hiring cycle was the next day. So I ended up putting in an application to be a Mesa police officer. And within the next year after that, I was hired as a Mesa police officer. And yes, and that is truly my story of how I became a cop.
I love it.
So cop for 23.8 years full time. I retired in February from that. As a cop, I was mostly a patrol officer. I did spend a lot of time on the street. I do love community policing, that kind of thing. I started CIT myself in 2004 is when I took the class, became really passionate about teaching mental health with my degrees. By then I did have my master's, so I started teaching cops, really became passionate about it, saw how important it was. Luckily in 2015, my department saw how important it was as well, made me the full-time CIT program coordinator. So for the last 7.5 years of my career, I actually did mental health full-time.
Hmm.
In that period of time, I was lucky enough to reestablish our CIT program, to develop a coalition in the eastern part of Maricopa County to start teaching CIT. We went in Maricopa County from 2 classes a year to 12 classes a year, and a whole lot more
Nice.
officers getting trained. We also developed a couple of different aspects of response. We do have a co-responder model attached to a mental health unit. So we have 8 full-time detectives who do mental health calls and what we call pickup orders. They have 2 clinicians that work with them. So that is our version of co-responder, which we'll talk about more. And then I helped develop our diversion program, which is on the other end of the spectrum, to start diverting some of these calls to the proper resources, as to not overburden the officers, and quite frankly, just to get people the help they need faster, without having to go through the criminal justice system. When I retired, I joined Community Bridges it's a nonprofit, a very large nonprofit here in Arizona. And I do the same thing. I just do it as a civilian now. I'm still an officer. Technically, I'm a reserve officer. So I volunteer for free now. I am actually still running Mesa's CIT program because they don't have a replacement yet. So I still do that for free. But I'm in Payson, Arizona right now, spreading CIT. I'm very passionate about CIT. I'm also passionate about just crisis response in general. I
Wonderful.
like to hike, and I have 2 dogs and a cat.
I love it.
That's my
love
story.
I love it. Great story. Moving to Arizona in July. I moved to North Dakota in January, and I moved to Tallahassee in August. So I'm with you. What does it say about our judgment?
Right.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Amanda. Leigh, tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I'm originally from Georgia. I went to school there, got a degree in psychology as well. And actually similar to Amanda, I applied to a bunch of random psych jobs all over the US and landed one in Massachusetts. So drove up there with all my belongings in my car, and I've been there for the past 12 years. I ended up working initially at an inpatient psychiatric hospital. And then I transitioned to outpatient mental health. So working with folks in the community with various mental health diagnoses. Then eventually decided I wanted to go back to school for my graduate degree. So I have a master's in social work. And since that time, I've continued to work in community mental health. Working with folks who may live in group homes, may live independently, may be homeless, just helping them kind of with various needs. Most recently, I ran a mobile crisis team. So working with folks who are specifically experiencing mental health crises and kind of working with them to figure out what would be most helpful in the moment, whether they need to go to an inpatient psychiatric hospital, can problem solve in the moment and remain in the community, or just maybe need mental health referrals. So then, let's see, and about 6 months ago, I moved to Durham and for an amazing job opportunity that I am so excited to be a part of. The HEART team, or the Community Safety Department in Durham. We're a brand new department, and we specialize in working with folks who are experiencing some sort of behavioral or mental health crises. And we respond to a subset of 911 calls, at times with the police, at times without the police. And we also have a clinician embedded in the 911 call center. So sometimes we don't have to send a response at all.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is going to be a great discussion tonight. And before we get down into the nuts and bolts of different crisis response models, whether it be CIT, whether it be other co-responder models and so forth, I'd like to ask my first question that's more of on a 30,000 foot level. And why is there so much focus on mental health crisis response these days? I mean, why do you think the need is there, and why is the need increasing? Can you give us some context for it? And either one of you who wants to go first.
Well, I mean, I will say, if you just look at our country right now, there's a lot going on. I will, as an officer, over the last 10 years, we've seen the increase. I always tell people that in my first 5 years or so, I probably responded to 2 suicidal individuals in 5 years. And in Mesa nowadays, we average between 10 and 13 a day. So we've seen it over the last 10 years. We actually saw a dip in 2020, and then in 2021, it skyrocketed. All of our crisis calls skyrocketed. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think we're getting to a good generation of people that realize it's okay to ask for help. And I also think that until we're a little better established in 988 and some of our community resources, that's the answer is still to call 911. I mean, there's not anything I haven't done in my career, the strangest request ever. So, when you call help, that's where you go. So I really think it's more just a product of people like recognizing something's going on and being and willing to ask for help, because the older generations really just didn't do that.
That's actually pretty encouraging, because it may be the first glimmer of hope that maybe mental health stigma is starting to break its hold a little bit. That people are, I mean, with not only celebrities, but just people in general being willing to say, hey, I need some help in this. Leigh, what do you think? Give us some context. Why is the need there? Why is the need so great?
Sure, I would definitely agree with everything that Amanda said. I think certainly where we are in the world, people are a lot more willing to talk about what's going on for them, which has kind of opened the door to us to actually have these conversations instead of kind of pushing them under the rug. But also, police departments are down staff. There are not people to actually respond to phone calls in a timely manner. There has to be something that changes within the system to allow for better help and better response. So I think I'm excited to be in the place that we're at, but it's also sad that we're at this point. But as we mentioned before, I think it's great that people are willing to have these discussions. At times they can be uncomfortable and difficult, but they're actually happening.
I think the conversations are essential, because we're starting to move away from the default position where, in many cases, especially in communities of color, and where the first experience that a person has that's a mental health crisis is either in the back of a squad car or strapped to the gurney in the ER. And I think with models like CIT and some of the other co-responder models, maybe we're first starting to move out of that and realizing that there are other alternatives available. And the reason why I wanted you both on tonight is not only because specific types of crisis response, but because your exposure to others. Amanda, you are a CIT authority, but I've heard you speak about very positively about other co-responder models, and that there are opportunities in those models, and also for some sort of synergy between. Leigh, you're working on some really creative pilot programs in Durham, but Durham has also been a really important partner in CIT. So we're seeing both sides of the fence. So I'd like to dig into each of them. And Amanda, I'm going to focus on you first. Let's dig into the CIT model. As you know, CIT has been very near and dear to the heart of NAMI from the very beginning. Sam Cochran, who is one of the founders of CIT, said that the single best indicator of a successful CIT program is the presence of a strong NAMI in the area. But it's possible that members of the virtual studio audience, or those that will be listening later, don't have much background in it. So give us some background. Tell us about CIT. What is it? How does it work?
So CIT was developed in the 80s in Memphis, Tennessee by Sam Cochran. He partnered with the police department and the University of Memphis and NAMI after a shooting occurred, a tragic shooting, where a young man with mental illness was killed by the Memphis Police Department. And it wasn't necessarily at the time like, oh, the cops are bad. It was, why are we calling them? This was the first time we asked that question. Like, this young man was in a mental health crisis. Why are we calling the police? Because the police are the police. Like, especially back in the 80s, they were. So we developed this program that has gone on for 40 years now, and it's just grown. And it's primarily thought of as a jail diversion program. Like, that is the idea of it. But it is kind of growing over the years. We're looking at pre-911 calls at this point to even divert. But there are 5 pillars to CIT, and we always forget that there are 5 pillars to CIT, because when people hear CIT, they think police training. Like that is the number one thing: police training, cops training, blah blah blah. And that is one of 5 things. Like you can have that, and I'll use an Arizona county for instance, because I know Arizona. I can go up to Apache County or Greenlee County in Arizona. For reference, we have 15 gigantic large counties, only 3 of which are populated. So we've got Greenlee County that probably has 12 people in it. I can go there and I can teach officers all day long about, the proper handling of individuals in a mental health crisis, but they have no resources. They have no connection to the providers. They have no people up there that are doing advocacy. So ultimately, I can teach them how to be nice, but that person is still going to end up in the police car going to jail. So we always have to be careful not to think of it as police training, because that's not what it is. It's community collaboration. Like you have to have the whole community. I mean, what I hear about Durham, it sounds like you guys have many layers of that. So the 5 layers: police training, behavioral health training. So we're going to go out to talk to the behavioral health staff about when to not call 911, not to use the cops to do their dirty work for them, to understand police culture, because we're different. Like we think differently. That's the only way we can do our jobs. Our brains are very much differently wired than most people. So understand why we think the way we do and how to respond to us. We also have a robust crisis system, which is probably, besides training, is the most important thing. You can give training all day long, but if you don't have a crisis system to match, and the robust crisis system is a call center, that is community response teams, that is clinics that work within your community. So you need a little bit of everything to push that. NAMI is one of the pillars of CIT, and that is your advocacy groups, your peer family advocacy groups. They have to have the buy-in, because the best advertising I can get for CIT has always been through my advocates. Like when I started this, I got to know my advocates, and I will tell you that we did not have amazing relationships at the beginning of it. We had to sit down, and we just don't have the conversations in place unless we kind of make ourselves do it. We as law enforcement have to respond to conversations in a certain way sometimes, but I didn't care about that personally. I was an officer. Nobody was going to fire me. What are they going to do? Send me back to the street? Like I wasn't worried about it. So we had real conversations about that. So those pillars are really important to make sure that your CIT program is what it needs to be. And I don't know if you guys know this, but it stands for Crisis Intervention Teams. And that is all of that. What I just described is the teams. It is not a group of cops. Like that is not what the T stands for. And it doesn't stand for training. Like it stands for team, because all those pillars are required to run a good CIT program. And the communities that have that, have all 5, are the ones that have the really well-developed programs. And there's quite a few of them across the country. I think there's going to be more. It's interesting to see how we're going to fit the other responses in, because the co-responder model doesn't exactly fit into the CIT model. And we'll talk about that. They're not against it. It's just not part of the CIT model. So that's kind of CIT in a nutshell.
I love it. Tell me though, as you say, most people automatically think of the 40-hour training, that is CIT, and that's certainly an important part. But I appreciate the fact that you say that there are the other pillars. NAMI's presence in CIT, in some places we're seen as the people that bring the snacks, rather than, a specific service for the community. Can you tell us just a little bit about the 40-hour trainings though that LEO go through?
Yeah, I sure can. And I can't believe you'd ever I bring the snacks personally, but yeah, our NAMI groups are crucial to any successful CIT program, because I will tell you the majority of police departments at this point teach mental health awareness in their academies or some sort. Like that is not about mental health awareness. That's not what it's about. It's about developing compassion and empathy. And more getting away from the stigma. So about 30% of the class is technical, your disorders, all of that good stuff. 30% more of that are your individual experiences. So we do personal perspectives on individuals who are in recovery from mental illness. We do personal perspectives with family members of individuals with mental illness. We do personal perspectives for people with substance use problems. We do it for homeless people. So we bring in everybody that is kind of in the populations that we see frequently, and we say, look, like, this is a person. Like, this is what the person with that problem looks like. This is what we're helping. And that's helpful for two reasons. One, because the officer gets to see the person, to hear their story. But two, we don't ever meet people on good days. Like, we rarely get that moment to say, oh, this is what recovery looks like. There are some mental health crisis and substance use crisis that we are just convinced that people have forever, and they're just going to be constantly calling the police. So for them to meet people, and that's where NAMI comes in. NAMI provides our family-to-family perspective and our in our own voice presentations. Sometimes they'll help us get depending on where we are, they'll help us get individuals who's experienced homelessness or anything like that. Without the personal perspective, it's really just a block of training. That I remember back in 2004 that made the difference in the training for us. And then the last part of the training is your resources. So your facility visits, your resources, whatever that looks like in your area. And we bring in the people that provide those on a face-to-face basis, so we can have that conversation about how do we make this resource work together. So it's all of it important, but I can't even imagine. The region I'm in right now is just kind of getting their NAMI up and running, but they were completely involved in the planning of this and came into the presentation for us and everything else. So
nice.
I can't even imagine not including NAMI.
A little bit off script, Amanda, what is your personal take? And I know it's a controversial question, and so I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. There is controversy between in some cases, different people saying, I want to have every single officer trained in CIT, and others that say, no, you don't train every single officers, you train us. What is your personal take on it?
I do not believe that every officer should be trained on it. And I say that with the caveat that we have training for officers, like we have other training, like for two reasons. One, these personal perspectives that I just spoke about are deeply personal to the people that come there. And I will tell you that not all cops will ever hear that. They just won't. Like, we have a spectrum of people that become police officers, and then just like there's a spectrum of people that become social workers. Like, we can't make the spectrum all equal. So there's certain people that if we forced it, they would come into a CIT program, and to me, be disrespectful to the people that are sharing their stories. That is one of my biggest problems with it, because I think we owe it to the people that are presenting to give them a class that really buys into the concepts. So we respect their stories, we respect their willingness to come tell us about their worst moments and be very open to listening to it. So that's my personal passionate part about it. The other part about it is CIT is researched. It is an evidence-based, researched training program. It's one of the few that law enforcement even has. Like, a majority of our stuff is not studied, it's not researched. CIT has been researched for 25 years. And two of the components that CIT has found that makes it successful are voluntariness and experience as officers. So if we take either of those two out of the equation, we don't know how successful it's going to be. So why not stick to the things that we know, to keep it that way, and to keep it evidence-based by sticking to what CIT International says. And that's what they feel about it, not just me. But the research has said that, is it the best practice? It absolutely is. But it's the best practice with the caveat of they have a little bit of experience and they want to be there. But I always tell people, like, remember, we're still training them. We're still training officers. Like, it's not like they don't get something. They get training. It's just not that.
Yeah, sort of an analogy is that you want anybody that's going to do some medical thing, it'd be helpful for them to have EMT training. That doesn't mean they have to go to med school.
Right.
And both of them are just as necessary. But I like what you say. We talk a lot about fidelity to the model. There are a lot of things going around out there that we call CIT that aren't CIT. This is what we're going to do, a 5-hour program. This is going to be our CIT. That if it's a 5-hour program, it's not CIT. We're going to do a thing for high school principals. That's a really valuable thing, but it's not CIT.
Right.
So
yeah, I think it's pretty. It's the shiny thing. And it's a known name, so
it's
people want to
reputable.
attach to it because it is so known, but it's just not.
Absolutely. Okay, Leigh, over to you. In Durham, I'm proud to say that Durham leads the entire state, the new HEART program, some of the 4 pilot programs that are going on in the city of Durham that I think are really going to be really important players in the whole field. So tell us about HEART. Tell us about the response models that are being used in Durham for those persons that are in mental health crisis.
Sure. So currently we've just launched our final pilot. So we've got 4 pilots up and running. The first one I'll talk about is our crisis call diversion. So that's where we have a clinician who's embedded within the 911 call center. So they're stationed at police headquarters within the call center, and their job is really to talk with the person in the moment of crisis and figure out what the best response would be. Can they have a conversation with that person on the phone and offer them resources and support and divert any sort of in-person response? Should we send our follow-up team out to meet with them later that day to bring them to a food pantry or a shelter, to whatever resources they may need in the moment that led them to call 911? Or do we need one of our responders to go there immediately? Do we need the police to go there, or our CRT team, or even our co-responders? Just making that determination by really talking to the person and being there for them kind of in that moment. So I think that's kind of the crux of our crisis call diversion. We've developed a really great relationship with the 911 call center and all of their staff members in the development of that specific pilot.
Will you be at all involved with the 988 transition, or is that going to be a completely different scenario?
So that is a completely different scenario, but we have worked with 988 just generally to see how our kind of resources can mesh together eventually. So 988 does have the option to transfer folks who are maybe more acute to 911, and in those situations we could also continue to talk to that person and support them until an in-person response arrives.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa, we could transfer a person to 988 or give them the number to call moving forward if that's more of the response that they need.
Do you operate solely within the city of Durham, or do county as well? Do you go beyond county?
We operate, so it's a little tricky. Let me give you a long answer.
That's okay.
The crisis call diversion and our care navigation, which is our follow-up team, operate fully within the city of Durham. So anyone who calls 911, that clinician can talk to, provide support, regardless of kind of where they live within the city. And same with our follow-up team. They can go out into the community, anywhere within the city of Durham, follow up with folks, get them the resources and support that they need, and offer them any kind of care, regardless of where they live. However, our co-response team, which is a clinician who's paired with a Durham police officer, and our community response team, which is a EMT, clinician, and a peer support specialist, they respond within certain beats of the city of Durham. So right now we're in 12 police beats, and those beats were identified by a year-long analysis of 911 phone calls to see the areas that were most in need of those resources and support until we can get a full program launched.
Okay, if you would then, the 2 different models, and it's not fairly to say a model because you're really talking about several models in one with yours, and you don't have to stay in your lane on this question. Talk about scenarios in which you think each of the models might be especially effective. The models like Durham and also CIT, and feel free to speak not only about your own model but each other's models. where are they? When is it the most effective, the two models?
So I will say that all of our staff members have gone through CIT training or are in the process of going through it now. We love the CIT model and are huge proponents of it. I think we partner with officers initially who have been CIT trained when we're doing our co-response model. And because I think that mental health background really lends itself well to working with a clinician and kind of understanding why we're asking these questions, why we're getting more information, and the resources in the community that are available to the person. So I guess that would be kind of one example of how we're partnering with folks who do have CIT training.
Amanda, I don't want to say you've done both sides of the fence. You've been CIT, but you've worked closely with other responder models. What about do you think? The different models, where are they the most effective?
Well, I think what Leigh was kind of discussing is it's a layered approach. Like the sequential intercept model is something that we all go off of to try to intercept the person out before they get into the criminal justice system. So CIT is 0 and 1. And we're not really in 0 too much, except for the fact that we're partnering with the people doing the 0. And you guys are doing the 0. Like the 0 is never having police respond at all. Like the diversion straight to the crisis line. And then CIT comes into play more so in the 1. Like that is 1. When we determine, when the dispatchers determine or the teams determine that they need the officer response because of safety reasons, then we send out our officers who hopefully have the CIT training. So CIT is really in that one space. That is where CIT is. And then if, we have co-responder models, we have those two, we have the teams with the EMTs, we all have all of that. So ideally, we want to stay in 0 and 1, regardless of whether we're CIT or we have other kind of crisis response. We want to stay there because as long as we stay in 0 and 1, nobody goes to jail. I mean, there are also responses for individuals that do have to be arrested because sometimes that does happen. And it sounds like, I would guess I'm making an assumption that Leigh's team might the co-responders or the clinicians might even go into jails. Ours do here. So I think what's really important to understand is they work together. Like they're just different layers. Like we don't pick one or the other. We pick it based on the situation. If we can keep it from ever going into 911, that's what we're going to do. If we go into 911, we're, going to send the best trained person to respond to that. If we need further, because ideally CIT, I would tell you CIT's concept is the officer shows up, stabilizes the scene, calls the professionals and leaves. And that's the ideal part, right? That's what CIT does. Sometimes though, with co-responder models, we call 911, the officers respond, stabilize the team, or stabilize the scene somewhat, but not enough for us just to leave the professionals. And then you got your co-responder model. Or sometimes your co-responder model could be the first response. And then you've got somebody specially trained in mental health. So what I always tell people is it should be dependent on the situation and it should match your community needs. Like more than anything. I will tell you, Phoenix, Arizona tried a co-responder model within their police department. Didn't work. Like it's too big. There's too much going on. The officers, the CIT officers in Phoenix had their approach. They handled it themselves. They very much understood the system and they worked faster and better just by doing that. There's not enough clinicians to handle calls in a city of 6 million people. I mean, it's just not. So you know your community and realize it's not one size fits all. Like that, I think what you guys are doing, what we're doing in Mesa is we recognize it's not one size fits all. Like we can't, as leaders, we got to realize there's not one program you can pick and say, this is where we're putting everything on, because it's just not going to work. You got to think outside of the box and react appropriately to the call as it presents itself.
Well, that sort of gets into my next question then. Are there differences? Are there fundamental differences that are more than the fact that there's law enforcement more likely to be involved in one model and less likely to be involved on a regular basis? Are there more differences? What are the fundamental differences between the two models?
I would say the biggest one is that CIT is that in and out thing, like safety, availability. Because the idea is that the less time that they spend around law enforcement, the less likely something bad's going to happen. Like, because that's just how it happens sometimes. So I think, and then when you look at your co-responder models, they're trying to prevent future calls. Like,
Right.
at least in my city, that's what they do. And I won't say that the CIT really isn't about that. In CIT, we pretty much teach, manage what's happening right there, realize that you're only handling what's right there, and turn it over to the professional. And so I think that's a fundamental difference, as CIT is really that get it out, get it done, either get the person where they need to go or turn it over to somebody else, and then officers go available. And the co-responders want to prevent future calls. They want to, like, that's what we do. We see high volume utilizers and we say, okay, we're going to spend more time here and we're going to figure that out.
What about you, Leigh? What do you see? Are there fundamental differences between the two?
I think it's all about the approach in the moment. I would agree with what Amanda's saying about maybe the timing of things. We certainly spend I would say a lot more time on scene depending on our response and the situation at hand. And that's because the scene has been cleared and it is safe for us to do so. So we also want to focus on building relationships with community members. So if you have someone who has food insecurities, who is homeless, if their say the call came in and they were trespassing, and that's why we're at that location, they're trespassing because they're homeless. Our goal in that situation is going to be to secure housing or some sort of housing resource for that person, to make sure that they have food, to make sure that they have their needs in the moment. Whereas maybe a police response would be to make sure that that person is off the property and that the property owner is kind of comfortable in the situation. So I think those lenses really could be different. Whereas overall, we want what's best for the person. Our goals and the way that we accomplish that may be different.
That's a really interesting. I think in a way it's almost like a Venn diagram, that there's a lot of overlap between the two models, and yet there are certain things that fall strongly onto the plate of, like, most officers don't have the time and in some cases expertise to be a psychological counselor, to be a trained counselor. On the other hand, a lot of mental health professionals that may go out on the street would be ill-equipped to deal with a crisis situation in which somebody has to be able to step in and provide immediate safety and things. So I don't think that even though they're different, I don't think that they're different from each other. So what are ways in which we can work to find synergy between the two? And you've been talking about this some, but are there structural things that we can do in our cities? Are there conceptual things? How can we find ways for each model to cooperate, to find synergy between the two? I mean, how can we do it in a real practical way, not just a theoretical way?
I mean, it sounds like Leigh's doing that already.
I mean, I think the most important thing and what we're continuing to do is to make sure each other, or both departments and both of the people responding know what the other person does, because I think that's where the barriers come in. If the understanding isn't there of why are you asking these questions, why are you spending all this time at the scene, and to the counterpart, if the social worker or the clinician doesn't have the knowledge of why are you talking to this person in this manner, and why did you kind of clear the scene in this way? If we don't have a fundamental understanding of each other's jobs, then we're not going to work well as a team.
Leigh, in Durham, does the dispatch, do they decide, or the call center, do they decide whether it goes to a police officer or whether it goes to your team?
So we've been fully integrated into the CAD system there. So the computer automated dispatch system, we have specific nature codes that we respond to. So specific call types. So say trespassing calls. Our community response team is available to respond to all sorts of trespassing calls. So anyone that comes in, it could go to them depending on the area and availability. So we have a list of call types that we can respond to that the computer recommends us to respond to.
But what about a person that's in a full-blown psychological crisis? How is it decided how is it parceled out?
Sure. So that call is likely, if the clinician is there, transferred to the clinician to speak to them in the moment to see, is there a weapon? Is this a dangerous situation? To determine what type of response is going to go. So if there's a weapon involved, it would likely be our co-responders who went to the scene. If there was any sort of violence or escalated behavior, that would go to our co-responders. So responding with a police officer. If there was not violence and the person was able to engage in kind of a linear and engaging conversation, then it could be our community response team who would go and speak with the person and determine kind of what best met their needs for that moment.
Okay. What about you, Amanda? You're in an urban area. How do you get synergy between highly trained CIT officers, but also mental health professionals? How do you achieve a synergy?
So I will tell you one of the biggest lessons we learned in law enforcement, and I always talk to law enforcement leadership about this, is to stop trying to make decisions for mental health professionals. And I'm pretty sure I said that in my class. Like, we are the worst about telling them how safe they are. Because we have found that how we see safety is not the same as how mental health professionals, especially people who are comfortable in crisis calls, handle that. We started bringing the professionals in to help us manage and triage the calls. Like, we were shocked. Our initial triage was basically anybody having kind of a bad day, but wasn't really thinking about doing anything, didn't have any plans. Those were the only things we transferred. And then we brought the professionals in, and they trained our individuals, our call dispatchers, they trained, what this looks like. They sat there and they helped them parcel it out. Because what we found is our teams, we have community crisis mobile teams in Maricopa County that respond out all the time. Like, I think we average about 2,300 a month in Maricopa County alone, and we don't have incidents. Like, we don't have anything scary happen because they know what they're doing. And quite frankly, the percentage of teams dispatch versus calls, I think we are about 24,000 calls a month, and only 2,000 of those are community stabilization. So make sure you're asking the right people to create your policies and your triage, because we as officers, we hear screaming and yelling and we're like, oh, we're going to that. And crisis workers are like, whatever, I'm going to take my clipboard and I'm going to be fine. I know what I'm doing, and so the relationships are so important, because you got to let the professionals be in their lane, and you got to, as officers, we have to stay in our lane. Like, that is important. I can have all the training. I mean, you heard my degrees, but the only initials that matters were OFC before the front of my name. Like, it was not I didn't use that. I wasn't a mental health professional. And we got to make sure that we're doing our jobs individually and not really trying to take on the other person's jobs.
Let me go a little bit off script. Thinking of something you said earlier, Amanda, and I'm curious for both of you. Mesa, huge city. Durham, moderately large city. It's not. I mean, it's 450,000 people, so not tiny, not huge. But there are, just like in Arizona, there are huge portions of North Carolina that are totally rural. You get outside of Charlotte, you get outside of the Triangle, and outside of Fayetteville and Greensboro, and you've got a rural. Same thing with Arizona. You get out of the major metropolises. The two models that you represent, do they work in rural areas, or what? How do you tweak the models?
My company works in rural areas, and the model is relatively the same. In Arizona, we have a statewide crisis line, so we would use the same crisis line, no matter what part of the state we're in. The only place in Arizona that's a little unique is we have a ton of reservations, so that's in its own world. Those are sovereign nations. So we're not going to, as private companies, we're not going to go there anyway. They have their own system, but everybody else, we use a statewide crisis line, so that helps a lot. And a lot of our rural areas have crisis mobile teams, but the difference is, in our urban areas, our crisis mobile teams are 15 to 45 minutes out. In our rural areas, they're an hour to 2 hours out. So it's really more about kind of managing the time. I will tell you, That is unfortunate, but sometimes it is easier for the rural deputies in the rural places to do their interventions in jail, because the person is safe, and they're going to be in a safe environment for a few hours until we can get help. So that's an unfortunate part of rural. But CIT doesn't work in rural areas if there's not a crisis system, that a fully developed crisis system. It doesn't, because there's no places to take people. We have in Maricopa County, we have 4 24/7 no wrong door facilities where any cop at any given moment can take somebody and drop them off. And in the rest of our state, minus Coconino and Pima County, the rest of Arizona, we don't have that. So without, in your rural areas, you have to develop your drop-offs, and they have to be in a reasonable amount of time to drive someplace. Otherwise, it's uncomfortable for everybody. You either have to sit and wait with the individual in crisis for hours on time, or you have to put them in handcuffs in the back of your car and drive for hours. So it's not the best case scenario. Can it work? I mean, it can, but the time frames are going to be a lot different.
I've been curious, even in North Carolina, about establishing a CIT presence on the Qualla boundary, which is the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and the even larger group of Lumbees. It would be an interesting scenario to see if CIT could operate efficiently and effectively within an indigenous area of the state.
You have the 5 things. There's no reason why it can't.
I agree.
Yeah.
And they both have really strong leadership. So something I think I'd like to pursue in the future. What about you, Leigh? I mean, by definition, the kind of programs that you have, would they work in a rural area? I mean, could you put it out up in northeastern or in western North Carolina?
So I think they could work within a rural area because we are embedded within the 911 call system. That's how we're dispatched. I do think that it would require a lot more staff in order to respond in a timely manner, because you have that travel time that really is going to be a burden on ensuring someone's safety in the moment. So if we had staff stationed in certain areas, throughout the day, maybe they're stationed halfway to a specific point or destination within the rural area, I think that would really aid a response time. It's certainly something that can be done, and I'm sure is being done, as you mentioned, by mobile crises in various areas.
It's challenging in a rural area when you have a lot of our counties in western North Carolina where you may have one mental health professional in the entire county. And so that's why I think telehealth worked so well with that. But the challenge is lack of broadband in those same areas. But it would be interesting to see if we could do these models there.
Can I say something real quick,
yes,
Gary?
please.
I'm pretty sure it was Houston. It might have been Austin. I don't remember. It was one of the more progressive Texas towns. They actually equipped their deputies with iPads. So while they didn't have a clinician with them, they took out the iPads and actually provided telehealth. Like, they would give the person the iPad and let them step away and kind of have their moment with the clinician. So you could kind of think outside of the box sometimes.
That is a really interesting. I think the operative word is stepping away.
Absolutely.
So that you don't have a police officer looking over your shoulder while you're talking.
Right.
So I think that's actually a brilliant idea. I think it could work.
Yeah. You just have to make sure they're actually calm, because we don't want iPads being broken.
That's true.
So, yeah, but it worked. I'm sorry, I don't remember which city, but it was either Houston or Austin, but they got a federal grant to buy just a ton of iPads.
Okay, let's touch the middle rail here. And this, I just want your view as crisis professionals. How prophecy is a dangerous business, I realize that, but how will the arrival of 988 affect crisis intervention over the long haul? Any thoughts?
You go, Leigh.
Yeah, so I think it can only help it, especially in integrating it, hopefully eventually more closely with the 911 call system, having clinicians who are there, who are trained to respond to these types of calls in the moment, and providing them with guidance and support and resources when people are experiencing those moments of crisis. I think I've discovered working in the 911 call center and answering these calls firsthand, sometimes people just need someone to talk to. They don't necessarily need someone to come to the house to take them to the hospital and, put them in on a psychiatric hold. They just need to get out what's going on for them in the moment and have someone listen. And I think that's where 988 can really and does excel in being a listening ear in that moment and connecting people with resources as well.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Amanda? And I realize that 988 is different in every state.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to Arizona that we were doing everything that we needed to do before 988 came to actually be able to merge to it pretty easily. We have our well-developed crisis system. But I personally think that it is a mentality change. And I think that it's going to help society start realizing where they need to go. Because right now, as I said in the beginning, 911's your option. And I think I think 988 is like the very best crisis intervention ever because it completely keeps the police out of it for the most part, if we can do that. And understand that I am not that person that, we can talk all day long. I don't think police need to stay out of it because we're awful at it. I could show you statistics. I've done a lot of work to show that for the most part, high percentage of calls with police, end just fine. I don't think of it. I think we have training. I think it's all of that, but we all know that the person's not going to get the help they need as easily. So why even include that step? Like if I was having a heart attack, I wouldn't go to a podiatrist. Like a podiatrist has been to medical school, absolutely. But if I can just go to the cardiac person, why not just go to the cardiac doctor? So I think 988 is like the very beginning of maybe transitioning law enforcement out of social work altogether, unless obviously there's very extreme dangerous situations, which is what we're there to do, and we're still very willing to do that. But I will say that if anybody's listening naturally, to make sure that your systems are set up, because otherwise it's just a longer trip back to 911. And there's a lot of states, it doesn't sound like you guys are going to have that, but there's a lot of states that just don't have infrastructure for 988 yet. They're just not going to have it. So it's just going to be calling 988. Okay, you need a mental health crisis. Well, we actually don't have anything to offer you, so we're just going to send you right back to 911. So I will, if you're a person that makes decisions in other states that don't have the infrastructure, like, you need to get to work because the expectation is there that you're going to be the ones to start responding.
I hate the term, but I do think 988 is going to be a game changer. I think NAMI has been a strong advocate. It's got some kinks that we have to work out. Here in North Carolina, they go into one call center, and then a mental health professional can talk to the person on site and then decide whether a mobile crisis unit can go out. And there have been a few technological glitches. Like in the first incarnation, it was based upon the cell phone. But if you moved from Oshkosh, Wisconsin to Raleigh, and you called, it saw Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And so, but they're starting to work out those kinks. The one fear that it has happened a few times that some people have had is the fear that you're going to call 988 and a police officer is going to show up at your door anyway. And but I think our own crisis center or a call center here, I think, is really doing an excellent job, and they have answered most of their calls aren't getting rolled off to other states. They're doing an excellent job. But I think you're right, Amanda. It's got to have the infrastructure built into the state. I think to their credit, I think North Carolina did an excellent job with that. So, okay, we're going to wrap up the interview portion of the show. Usually we go to around 8 o'clock, sometimes a little bit after that. Before we move to our video of the week and then to the question and answers, I want to give a big shout out to those working behind the scenes, specifically our social work intern, Caitlin Rada from Appalachian State University, and our own psychiatric nurse, Gail Pruitt, who is the heart and soul of NAMI, North Carolina. And of course, Amanda and Leigh, thank you for spending your evening with us. Our video of the week, we usually have something funny, but this next Tuesday, we have our NAMI North Carolina annual conference. And our keynote speaker is Charles Clark, who is a world-class athlete, one of the fastest men in the world, 3 times NCAA national champion, USA track and field champion, silver medalist. So let me give you a little bit of taste of what Charles will be bringing to the event. Can you see it?
Yo, what's up? It's Charles Clark, world-class athlete and motivational speaker. As someone who's battled with sports anxiety and learned how to overcome the adversity of a devastating injury, I'm so excited to share how we can use adversity to build greater mental toughness and mental health. So join me at NAMI North Carolina's 2022 annual conference on Tuesday, October 4th at the McKinney Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is going to be the highlight event of the year because this is the first in-person annual conference in 3 years. Now, we've had many challenges along the way, but this conference is all about going to the next level of educating, going to the next level of empowering, going to the next level of encouraging members in our community that have been affected by mental illness. So register for this awesome, extraordinary conference at NAMI North Carolina's website, www.naminc.org. I'm so excited to see you guys there. Let's rise and thrive. Peace. Yo, what's up? It's Charles Clark.
I think it is going to be a really good conference. He's going to be a really good speaker. So, so a virtual studio audience, this is a time now if you have any questions at all, and we go with the energy of the time. This has been a really full event, and I appreciate your being with us. And Gail will have, for those of you that are on Facebook, if you have any questions, she will make sure we get to them. A question that is specifically for you, Amanda. How can someone get involved with CIT, perhaps as an advocate? Is a degree mandatory?
So our 40-hour class, is that what you're specifically referring to?
Or just in general, CIT, being involved with the 5 pillars, as you say?
Well, if you want to be involved in the 5 pillars, you're either a provider or you're working with an organized advocacy group like NAMI usually. We do have to vet a little bit of who comes into the classroom and speaks. So we usually do go through NAMI. A lot of your agencies will have a CIT coordinator, and that could be a sworn officer. Sometimes it can be a social worker provider. Sometimes it's both. We have agencies that have a mental health CIT coordinator and then a sworn CIT coordinator. So you can always get to know them. I will tell you that we do continuing education frequently. So we'll bring in people that we vet to teach at the recruit level to officers that have already gone through. So it's a matter of getting that connection either through the CIT program and the coordinator or your local NAMI organization. And then we typically pull our instructors from our local providers. I mean, because that's important. You know, I didn't say this, but one of the things about the 40-hour classes, the classes are taught by the professionals doing the job. That is very unique in police work, and mostly because everything else we train in police work is actually police work. So, you know, we have police officers training us how to do police officer things, but we actually bring in our providers who are doing the job to teach the disorders classes and whatnot. There's a couple of classes like the de-escalation for police that is taught by police. But if you're interested in teaching, you know, just find out where they're getting their pool of instructors for, and you can volunteer. I will also say that we have, most CIT programs have a heavy day of scenarios. I didn't mention that, but we do a heavy day of scenarios, and they're very intense, long scenarios and realistic. And all of our actors are either people with lived experience or people that work in the field with people with lived experience. So if you see yourself an actor, you know, and you want to go and act out some of the scenarios you've experienced in life, that's great for the officers because it gives them a very realistic experience. And it kind of is a different kind of scenario than they're used to. When we grade them differently than we would, say, a police training scenario. So those are a few ways.
That's fantastic. And also I would say that, I am on the state CIT committee, as well as Madonna Greer, who is the president of NAMI Guilford County. She's not only on the state CIT, but she's actually on CIT International Board. So if you want to find out more about it, contact one of us. We would be more than happy to send you information related to it. Okay, another question, and this is an awkward one. Keep it within. There are some things through confidentiality I know that you can't and shouldn't share, but tell us about an event or some occasion in your different models that you feel really good about it, that it just really worked well. Can you think of any examples?
I'll let Lee start while I'm thinking.
Sure. So I have one kind of fresh on the mind, and just kind of keeping it very vague.
Please.
We unfortunately get a lot of calls for people who have been involved in intimate partner violence and who are in some thought process of getting out of that situation. So recently, I was speaking with someone at the 911 call center who had a recent police interaction and was hopeful and about getting out of that situation. The partner had recently been physically abusive, and it was kind of the person had reached their breaking point, and we had a really good conversation about what it would look like for that person to leave their partner and what steps that person would need to take and the specific community resources they could utilize to put that plan into action. So at the end of the phone call, that person had the resources that they needed in the moment to take the steps to get out of that environment. And we were able to continue to follow up with that person to make sure that they continue to have the resources and support they need for that huge life change.
Great example. Thanks, Lee. Okay, Detective Stamps. You have to have some stories.
I thought of a couple, and they involve CIT and our mental health squad with our co-responder. One started off with a CIT officer contacting. They had spoken with this young man who was pretty young. He was an adult, but a new adult who was in an extreme psychosis. And he did end up being arrested, I think, for some minor stuff like, your garden variety trespassing, disorderly conduct, those things that they tend to get arrested for. But the CIT officer reached out to the squad and said, this guy he's not even from here. He's just driving through here. His story didn't make any sense. He was driving to California, all of this. So they ended up doing a lot of work, and we have a process in our jails where I don't know if he pled or he was going to be held till his next court date, but we can take our people out of our misdemeanor jails and take them over for treatment based on a court order. So the squad did the court order for him, got it approved through the courts, got him released over to stabilization within one of our hospitals. And he went back, and after he went back, we went before the judge and kind of said, hey, this is what's going on. While we were doing this, we got his parents involved, who were in Texas. And they drove all the way out. And apparently this was this young guy's first psychiatric break, and first time in psychosis, all of that stuff. And he rented a car and just started driving. And the family was so grateful that the officers took the time to take all these steps. He could have just been booked in jail and remained in jail. But, one of the keys to helping people when they are experiencing their first psychotic break is to get them help in their first psychotic break. And the officers did such a good job that they ended up taking him back to Texas. The courts dismissed the charges, all of the good stuff, but the family was so very, very, very grateful to everybody involved. And that was a layer of CIT and the co-responder mental health squad. I have a lot of those stories now that I start thinking about them, but I won't talk too long. But that's why the layers are important, because a lot of your CIT officers are not going to have the expertise or time to do what the squad did. And the squads can do that. We have a CRT. Ours is called mental health support team, but it is a CRT, a crisis response team. So we have that too.
I was at I had the privilege of tabling usually at the North Carolina Association of Chiefs of Police convention, and I've had so many chiefs come up to me and talk to me about CIT officers and the difference that they've made. One story in particular where a person was really in a crisis. Not only was the officer able to calm the situation down, make sure that everyone was safe, but also became just very human in helping the person get the help that they needed, helping them get their stuff together. The family watched, and as this police officer just mastered the situation. So I love those stories, because in a day and age where it seems like people want to focus on the very few police officers where there's a problem. Police officers are such an incredible resource, and they go above and beyond the call of duty. And those sort of stories really, really sort of bring it home. Okay, one last question that just sort of puts it in completely unrelated. You can relate it to your positions, but just in general, we live in as you suggested earlier, Amanda, we live in a stressful time. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of polarization, there's a lot going on, and some people are becoming very pessimistic. So just to end the conversation tonight, both of you, what gives you hope? What gives you hope?
I guess I'll go first. Well, I mean, I've spent 25 years of my adult life kind of going through a whole lot of different parts of trends of the world, I would say. But I have seen so much willingness from providers. I will say that, and probably if the cops heard me say this, they would slap me, but the good thing that came from the defund the police discussion was a real discussion about police officers' actual jobs. And it also created an understanding of where the responsibility, so to speak, lies, and that that's where we're lacking. It really was that push to say, hey, let's stop stigmatizing, all of this homelessness, substance use. I really think it started opening people's eyes to the problems that have been caused by using police as your catch-all. Police can still exist. Police, they're still going to be around. It's not that we're going to not be. The day that a police officer doesn't have to take a social services call is better for everybody. Better for everybody. Imagine the police officers actually proactively fighting crime. I mean, wouldn't that be a great thing? So I think because of some of the negative things, it is pushing us in the right direction. And the funding from the feds is obviously really important, and we've had a chunk of that being released recently. Younger generations are they're going to be. I'm an old generation. I'm a Generation Xer.
Don't even go down that route,
yeah.
Amanda.
But I just see the younger generations with that desire to find solutions to those problems that I don't necessarily think we did 20 years ago. So I definitely have hope. These conversations give me hope. Going to talk to NAMI groups and to share, the police culture and what my life was like. And, I will tell you that I go to advocacy groups as a peer now. I am a peer. There's almost no way to make it through 25 years of being a cop and not a peer.
Yeah.
So, I think we're starting to blend our relationships a lot better than we used to. And I do have a lot of hope for the future.
What about you, Leigh? What gives you hope?
I think just having open and transparent conversations like this, the ability to talk about two different worlds and what they look like together is really inspiring for the future. Every day that our co-response model is working, and that we're getting to know officers and they're getting to know us, so that we can really partner together and provide a good and holistic response, gives me hope. We can see someone and just talk to them and give them water, and that experience is a positive experience that can build a relationship for the future the next time that we meet with them.
That's wonderful. What gives me hope is similar to what you said about being a peer, Amanda, I went one Sunday to a large Baptist church in Durham, and first time that I'd been there, and the pastor gave a really good sermon, but then he's near the end of it, he said, "I want to talk to you. I want to be very honest with you about the emotional struggles that I've been having through all of this, through COVID-19 and everything." And he just really, as the leader, really put himself out there, and it was very vulnerable about the struggles that he was having. And anytime a leader like that, like what you said a few minutes ago, Amanda, is willing to say, I struggle too. And I think the more we have people that are willing to say, I'm not okay, and it's okay that I'm not okay, that gives me hope. That gives me hope that maybe we can make a difference. Thank you, both of you. It has been wonderful having you. I've wanted to do this topic just for a very long time, and I could not have had two better people to talk on the topic. So thank you. Next week, Peg will be back interviewing Dr. Nicole Washington. Dr. Nicole is a psychiatrist with a gift for working with folks that typically don't want services. That includes other psychiatrists. Her ability to engage a wide range of people has evolved into an ability to convince people to seek treatment when necessary, and has allowed her to be a mentor and a confidant to others. When the Zoom closes down, there you should get a survey on your screen. Please fill it out so we can know how we can do this better. Leigh and Amanda, thank you so much for your time tonight. This has been wonderful, and I hope to see both of you soon. Thanks to you both.